Hello students. So finally we have reached to last unit, unit number 5. And this unit number 5 is compilation of what we have studied till now. That is, whatever you have studied in last 4 units, the compilation is nothing but a writing report. You have frame objective, you had hypothesis, you have done lots of literature review. Then there was data collection technique, data collection, data entry, analysis, selection of specific statistical techniques and tools. And now it is last part, that is compilation, that is writing a report. So what we are going to study in this particular unit, we are going to study about interpretation and report writing. And then we will discuss about application of research in various functions of an organization. So we will divide this into two parts. First part will include interpretation and report writing, and second part, which will be next video, will be on application of research in the functional areas of management like marketing, production, HR, finance, entrepreneur development cell, and so on. So in this particular video, we are going to study about interpretation and report writing, in which we will study what do you mean by interpretation, what is data interpretation, what are various techniques of interpretation, what are various steps in writing report, and more important, the general layout of research report. Because once the research report layout is framed, we have to just put in the content or matter. So we'll move. First, we must understand meaning of interpretation. What do we mean by interpretation? What is the meaning of interpretation? Well, interpretation refers to task of drawing inferences from the collected facts after an analytical and experimental study. In fact, it is a research for broader meaning of research findings. So what is interpretation is, whatever literature review we have done, we have framed research questions on the basis of which we have framed research objectives, hypothesis was framed, data was collected, analysis was done. Now whatever we have done, we have to conclude, we have to write interpretation. What do we infer from all those analysis and facts? This is what interpretation is. Why interpretation? Why it is important to have interpretation in a report writing? Interpretation is essential for simple reason that the usefulness and utility of research findings lie in proper interpretation. So the ultimate objective of writing a report is that it should have management application. The findings of the research should be applied, and the application can be done only when there is interpretation by the researcher. It is being considered a basic component of research process. This is because of the following some of the points which is important to have interpretation. It is through interpretation that a researcher can well understand the abstract principle, what is the ultimate objective, what is the ultimate principle for which this particular work carrying findings. The particular research has some findings, and these findings are the ultimate objective of doing research. Through this, the researcher can link up his finding with those of other studies. That is, whatever literature review has been done and whatever my finding is there, how they are correlated, how the findings of other researchers and findings of my research are interrelated. Whether they have the same abstract principle, thereby can predict about the concrete world of events. So this could be one of the reasons why interpretation is must. Second is, interpretation leads to establishment of explanatory concept that can serve as guide for future research studies. It opens a new avenues, because whatever finding I had or whatever finding a researcher had based on facts, these findings are going to help new researcher. That is, these findings may become future scope of study by other researchers. Then the researcher can better appreciate only through interpretation why his findings are what they are, and can make others to understand the real significance of his research findings. See, through this interpretation only, researcher can conclude to other reader or to the management why this finding is and what is expected from this finding, how it can be applied. This is only when there is interpretation. The interpretation of the findings of exploratory research study often results in hypothesis for experimental research, and such interpretation is involved in transition from exploratory to experimental research. See, in the first unit we have discussed about the types of research, where we discussed about exploratory research, descriptive research and causal research. Causal research is nothing but experimental research. So if the research is exploratory, which will include hypothesis testing, this hypothesis testing is going to help for experimental research. So each stage of research will be based on the finding of previous research. One type of research is going to help the other type of research when interpretation is written. Now, the techniques of interpretation. What are various techniques of interpretation? The techniques of interpretation involves the following step. First step is, researcher must give reasonable explanations of the relations which he has found, and he must interpret the lines of relationship in terms of underlying process, and must try to find out thread of uniformity that lies under the surface layer of his diversified research findings. So the technique of interpretation is, there must be a reasonable explanation, and reasonable explanation means the explanation should be sufficient, and these explanations must be based on facts and findings of the research, which should define the relationship, if any, between dependent variable, independent variable, or if there is any causal relationship between variables, and what are various underlying process that has been included or used in the given research, so that a thread of uniformity can be framed. Second is, any extraneous information. Extraneous information here means, during my initial stage of research, I have defined certain variables, dependent variable, independent variable, certain variables I have defined, but during course of research, there can be some extraneous variable, there can be some of variables which I have not included, but that are important from research point of view that can be interpreted, that can be explained, that can be highlighted by researcher in his interpretation. So any extraneous information, if collected during study, must be considered while interpreting the final result of the research study, for it may prove to be a key factor in understanding the problem under consideration. So the point here is, there can be a chance that whatever variables we have considered initially, and we thought that these variables are more important, but during course of research, when extraneous variables comes into picture, which have a great impact on the findings. So that must be explained clearly during interpretation of the result. Then, it is advisable before embarking upon final interpretation to consult someone having insight into the study and who is frank and honest and will not hesitate to point out omissions and errors in logical argumentation. See, interpretation is an important part of any research, but it should not be considered as a formality. This is very important to have proper interpretation. That's why it is recommended that a rough interpretation note should be prepared, and that should be discussed with experts or who are open to share their experience for the given research, so that if there is any error or omission, that can be corrected at beforehand. And one more point we must discuss, that the researcher must accomplish the task of interpretation only after considering all relevant factors affecting the problem to avoid false generalization. He must be in no hurry while interpreting results, for quite often the conclusions which appear to be all right at the beginning may not at all be accurate. So how much importance is given to interpretation can be concluded from fourth point, that all possible factors which are affecting problem should be considered while giving interpretation, so that there is no any false generalization of my research. The researcher must be patient enough so that interpretation of the result can be concluded in proper way, so that if any inaccuracy or if any error seems to be there in my research, that can be avoided. Next, we will discuss about introduction about how layout of the research report can be prepared. It is important for the researcher to present the research material in a systematic and predefined manner. A good research is diluted if it is not presented well by the researcher. If you have collected proper data, analysis is very good, objective frame was good, hypothesis testing was performed well, but if interpretation or if the presentation of the research is not proper, it is concluded that the research is diluted. There exists a difficulty in communicating the researcher's mind to a common person or a person who does not have a solid research background. Therefore, while writing a research report, one must consider as a common person, not as a researcher, so that every small minute point must be explained with utmost accuracy, so that a common person who does not have any solid research background can also understand, interpret and apply the findings and conclusions of given research. A proper balance between the thinking of researcher and the requirement of sponsoring agency is of paramount importance. Many times it happens that the researcher gets funded through some researching agency or any organization, and if the language or communication between the researcher and sponsoring agency is not proper, then the interpretation and finding of the research may not be fruitful for application of the problem in hand. So it's better कि रिसर्च रिपोर्ट की राइटिंग ऐसी होनी चाहिए कि जो स्पॉन्सरिंग एजेंसी है या जिसने ये प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व करना चाहता है वो प्रॉपरली अंडरस्टैंड कर सके और उसके बेसिस पे रिजल्ट और फाइंडिंग को अप्लाई कर सके. इन नटसेल, द रिपोर्ट मस्ट कंटेन all important ingredients of the research in a systematic and predetermined manner. So there must be a proper layout, a systematic layout, a predetermined parameters should be there on the basis of which any research report should be written. So this is a general layout of writing report. See, it is a general layout. So there can be certain research report where every point may not be considered. Some point may be omitted or some additional point must have been added. So this is just a general layout of writing report. There can be many types of report, like report can be in the form of article, report can be in the form of research publications, report can be in the form of thesis, or report can be like curriculum for students. It can be a major report or research report. So every research report may have a different layout. The general layout what we are going to discuss is maybe exclusive in nature. So let's discuss some of the points. There must be a title page. If it is a sponsoring agency or if data is collected maybe from some sponsoring agency or from some government agency, in that case letter of authorization must be there. Table of content should be there, which includes list of figures, tables. Then fourth point is executive summary, which includes executive summary is one-page summary, which can have a length of 250 to 300 words. But this executive summary should compile whole report. It must include objective, concise statement of methodology, results, conclusions, and recommendations. So all these parameters should be included in executive summary. Then further, there is a fifth part, that is body of the report, which includes introduction about the research objectives, research methodology, which includes sample size, method of sample collection, sample profile, sampling techniques, scaling techniques, questionnaires if test statistics used, and fieldwork. Then there will be results and findings. So results and findings may include data analysis. Then there will be result. On the basis of result, there will be finding. Conclusions and recommendations are interrelation between the previous researcher's study, that is literature review, and the findings of the given report. Then there must be recommendation on the basis of findings, limitations of the research. Then in appendix, there can be copies of data collection forms, statistical output details if required, journal tables that are not included in the body, bibliography which include references, bibliography or books referred, Other required support material included in appendix. So this is the journal layout, which is classified into six parts. Then we'll discuss each head in brief. First one is title page. Title page, an attractively laid out title page is important for making a good first impression on the reader. As per Parshuraman in 2004, he has given great thrust, an important thrust on the title page. So title must be well defined. Title should be such that it attracts the reader. Like a given example is Change in Consumer Attitude, a comparative study in pre and post liberalization period. So title must summarize many information in hand. The title page should also include the researcher's name. If there is any agency, funding agency, then there can be a funding agency, and the researcher, if any organization is sponsoring, then organization's name and year of study, year of writing report. So title page should include the title, the prepared by maybe researcher and any sponsoring agency, and date of writing report, date and year of writing report. The next is letter of authorization. Letter of authorization. So letter of authorization is issued by research sponsoring agency to the research conducting agency before the actual start of the research. Many times letter of authorization can also be availed if a specific data is collected from specific agency. Then it is a formal letter that authorizes the research conducting agency to conduct research. This letter of authorization is must if the research is done for any research sponsoring agency, as there can be situation where some important data or specific data are collected. It generally includes the name, title of the person who authorizes the research to conduct the research. It may include general description of the nature of the research, type of research, the starting date, completion date, terms of payment, and any special condition of the research project if required. Then table of content. Table of content. The table of content presents the list of topics included in the research report and the corresponding page numbers. It helps the researcher in locating the required information through relevant page numbers, the title page, the letter of transmittal, letter of authorization. Table of contents are generally numbered with Roman numerals and so on. Arabic numerals are used for executive summary part of the research report. What is executive summary? Executive summary, very often executives go through executive summary only, or many times a reader go through only summary or abstract of the report. Then if he finds that the abstract are meaningful or convincing, then only he will go for the detailed report. As the first part of the executive summary, the objective of the research work must be clearly highlighted. In second part, in the category of concise statement of methodology, sampling technique, the research design, or any other procedural aspects must be incorporated in one or two paragraphs. The third part of the executive summary should include the results in brief format. It is really difficult to summarize the results. Fourth category, conclusion of the study should be arranged. Conclusion are merely statement of what research generated and what meaning can be attributed to the findings. Recommendations are included as next item in the research report, and many times executive summary also includes the future scope as well as limitations. So all these 5 items is must. Then future scope and limitations can be added if required in executive summary. Again, the size of executive summary is only of 300 350 words. So all these heads should be included within these word limits. Then body of the report. The body presents a broad, detailed study of the research. It consists of 6 sections. What are these 6 sections? It consists of background, that is called an introduction, research objective, research methodology, which include the sample size, sample profile, sampling techniques, scaling techniques, questionnaire, test statistics and fieldwork, as well as results, conclusions, recommendations, limitations of the research. The introduction section contains some basic background information that describes the problem at hand. There is no rigid guideline available to decide what should be incorporated in the introduction part, and this is left to the discretion of individual researcher. What he or she feels is important to be included in introduction part. Generally, in introduction part, the background of the problem in hand is discussed, maybe considering bottom-up pyramid, maybe or if the problem is global level, then a brief discussion about the same problem on global level, then country level, then it can be maybe state level, city level, or individual level. So introduction is nothing but giving a brief background of the research or brief background about the problem or title of the research. Then second part is research objective, may be incorporated in the introduction section or it can be a separate section. Specific hypothesis constructed in relation to the problem must also be included in this section. So this research objective can be through literature review. So after introduction, there can be one section that is literature review, where a thorough and deep study about the past research or research done by other researchers can be studied, and the gaps can be identified. Through those gaps, research problems will be framed. On the basis of research problems, there will be research objectives. On the basis of research objectives, there will be specific hypothesis. So, between research objective and introduction or background study, there is a lot of work to be done. Then after research objective, there will be research methodology. Research methodology is nothing but collection of data. How data will be collected, what will be my sampling frame, what will be my sampling technique, what should be my sample size, what should be my instrument to collect samples, and what will be my scaling to collect samples. And after all these, what kind of statistical tools I am going to use. Then there will be field work, means collection of data, and after collection of data, this data will be compiled in a given format. Then there will be analysis of this data, maybe using some statistical software like SPSS or Statistica or Systat, or many more statistical analytical tools are available. So the collected data can be analyzed using these tools, and the finding of these, means outcome of these tools, will be used for results interpretation findings. So next part is results and findings. Results and findings section mainly discusses the outcome of the statistical analysis performed to test different hypotheses. So after results and findings, there will be conclusion. Conclusion should always be fact or should always be based with the results and findings as well as literature review, as well as the findings of other studies. So conclusion is derived from the acceptance or rejection of the hypothesis. On the basis of these conclusions, there must be recommendations. So recommendations are generated from critical thinking of the researcher. These recommendations will be given to sponsoring agencies or to the society at large so that the findings can be applied. Some of the most common limitations of the business research are sampling bias, sample size, time and cost problems, measurement error, to name a few. The limitations of the research should not be overemphasized. Rather, the aim should be to aid the decision maker in taking appropriate action. Any information that is of significance to the researcher and reader but cannot be placed in the body part of the research report should be placed in appendix. अगर कोई ऐसा टेबल है या ऐसा कोई डेटा है या क्वेश्चनर है which is या कोई मैथमेटिकल रिलेशन है which is important for my research, तो इस पार्ट को हम अपेंडिक्स में ऐड कर सकते हैं if it is not added in body part. There is no fixed universally accepted rule regarding the information which should be included in appendix. Rather, it is researcher's discretion what or he or she feels important to be included in appendix. Then, whatever data collected, analyzed, that must be well represented. So normally tabular presentation of data is done. There are certain representations where graphical representation or outcome of statistical tools can also be used for representation of data. So like this one is a tabular representation. So if you see, it is well defined, the source, like this data I have taken from business research method textbook, a business research method written by Dr. Naval Vajpayee. So if you see, this data is well defined, which includes year, company's name and details. And here at the bottom, the source of this data is also mentioned. So if we are doing any tabular representation, all these parameters should include what is table number, what does this table represent, and in well-defined layout, data should be represented. There must be source of this data. Then graphical representation of data. Graphical presentation of data seems to be more appealing when we simply want to convey the trend of data, because many times it is not possible that conclusion can be drawn through raw data. But if the raw data is converted into graph form, it becomes more appealing or interpretation can be fast. Some of the basic and most commonly used methods of presenting data in graphs and charts are bar chart, pie chart, histogram, frequency polygon, ogive, scattered plot, and many more. Some of these are shown. Bar chart is like this one. When we are presenting data bar chart, there must be proper description of axis detail, y-axis, x-axis detail, and there must be all those data which are important or helpful to draw conclusion. And if any further remarks you want to specify, that can be explained in the chart itself. Then pie chart is nothing but distribution of variables or any data in the form of pie. Now this can also be, this is represented in absolute terms. This can also be represented in percentage term or proportion term. And the benefit of this pie chart is that it can be colorful, which will help for visual interpretation of data. Similarly, there is a histogram where you want to show a continuous distribution of data. A histogram can be used, and there must be well description of x-axis and y-axis details, and data should be represented, and interpretation can be drawn through this histogram. Then there can be scattered plot. Scattered plot is nothing, it is distribution of sample, how sample is distributed over the given parameters like net income and advertisement expenses. This is what the distribution of data. So this is scattered plot, and through scattered plot we can take many conclusions whether data is normal, how most of the data is distributed, whether data is skewed or not, and so many. Then last three part of any report is conclusion, a detailed summary of the findings and the policy implications drawn from results can be explained. Bibliography is nothing but the various sources consulted or used for preparation of report must be well explained. That is, we should give due reference or thanks to other researcher who has done research on the same area. So there must be a proper referencing. If proper referencing is not done, there can be a case of plagiarism. Then technical appendices, as discussed, it can be any questionnaire or mathematical derivations, elaborations on a particular technique of analysis and likewise. So all these are the layout of any research report. So in this given video we have discussed why interpretation is important, why the interpretation must be done in a proper manner, what should be a proper layout of writing a report, and what should be included while writing a research report. So we have discussed at large. In next video we will discuss about the functional application of research methodology, like what is the application of research methodology in finance, application of research methodology in marketing, in HR, in entrepreneur development cell, maybe in economics and all. So thank you. Keep on giving feedback.